Elite Facts presents
10 more of the most annoying enemies in video games.
10.
Cougars, Red Dead Redemption. Many of you are probably well aware of how protagonist John Marston's son, Jack, grows up to be a handsome young man. But it is not the older woman with an appetite for the young either of them have to worry about. Cougars in Red Dead Redemption are reason enough to not leave the trail. There is a good chance that at some point you'll be out in the prairie gathering flowers or materials when out of nowhere you'll find yourself being downed by a big cat that has jumped from out of nowhere. You have to get back up and start running quickly because the next attack is likely going to kill you. In fact, if you're on anything less than full health when one attacks, you're a goner. A testament to Rockstar's realism in this game, but you won't see the cougar that gets you until it's too late, as like in real life, they'll sneak up on you through the tall grass before pouncing. If you're lucky, you might hear the snarl of the big cat, at which point you ought to ready your gun and hightail it out of there.
9.
NPC Officers Dynasty Warriors series. The Warriors franchise has given us many games where you play as one warrior versus thousands. Based on the Chinese novel The Romance of the Three Kingdoms, the Dynasty Warriors series pretty much invented the hack and slash genre of games. Mostly you'll play as notable officer and cut your way through hordes of enemy soldiers. Usually you'll come up against another notable officer like yourself, and they can provide quite a challenge, what with their unique movesets and dialogue. You might think it's annoying every time Lu Bu turns up wanting to gut you with his halberd, but that is at least a challenge made all the more epic by his theme music. The real nuisance enemies in these games are countless clones of non-playable officers in these games meant to represent characters in the game's era of history. While they can often easily be dispatched during the later battles in the game, you can sometimes find yourself fighting 3 or 4 of these generic NPC officers at once. What's worse is that they'll often spam the same few knockdown attacks, stopping you from getting a hit in while their mook guards take pot shots at you. The real icing on the annoyance cake comes from the dialogue. Most of these NPCs will use the same few lines of dialogue when you meet and beat them over and over again. There are only so many times in the space of 5 minutes you can stand hearing, "I shall return, remember that, for yours is the first head I shall seek."
8.
Emo Boys, Ratchet & Clank. Ratchet & Clank was a near-perfect PS2 platformer, and it had its fair share of enemies for you to deal with. Some were challenging, others no more than fodder that you would whack away with the wrench. But Emo Boys were just a nuisance. You whack them and they break into 2 smaller ones. You whack the smaller ones and they break up again into 2 even smaller ones. They're basically like multiplying Russian nesting dolls. Sometimes you'll be finishing off one and all the tiny ones it breaks up into when one will catch you from behind. And it doesn't help their case that they always make their wrenching noise when they attack. Your better options are to pick them off at a distance with a stream of blaster fire, so that they can never get close enough to you to be a threat, and if you absolutely have to, use the pyrociter and werf them with flamin'. The most fun way to deal with these green nasties, though, is to turn them into a chicken with the mofo ray, and then whack them with the wrench. That way, the only thing they split up into is a cloud of feathers.
7.
Brutes, Saints Row 3. Big, bald, and burly, the result of genetically enhanced cloning and a whole lot of roids, the brutes in Saints Row 3 start off like challenging mini-bosses, but eventually end up wrecking ball damage sponges. Admittedly, you can perform some brutal finishing moves on these pumped nasties, but given that one of the easiest ways to deal with them is to quite literally hit them with a truck, you can't help but wish they'd die a little easier. In later missions in the game, it's not unusual to have 3 of these baldies running at you while you're trying to fend off wave after wave of rival gang members. Between dodging the charging brutes and the hail of gunfire, it can all get a bit chaotic, and not the good kind of chaos the Saints Row games are known for either. There's a good chance a brute will end up flipping a car at you that's already just dropped off a load of enemies, and likely killing you. Some even have miniguns and armor. These guys are nightmare-level damage sponges that will lock you down for days. At least the flamethrower ones explode when hit in the fuel tank.
6.
Juggernauts, Call of Duty Modern Warfare series. Speaking of damage sponges, it would be hard not to mention Call of Duty's Juggernauts. First appearing in Modern Warfare 2, they were rare enemies encountered only in the harder Spec Ops mission. Back then, they were quite an exciting challenge, as you'd have to figure out the best way to take them down and come up with clever strategies to deal with them. In a series that started off as realistic gritty shooter, the rare appearance of a machine gun-wielding giant in EOD didn't seem like too much of a break in reality. When they started popping up in the later games, though, they did so more often and felt like a cheap way to ramp up the game's difficulty. Their appearance in Modern Warfare 3's survival mode ranged from challenging to plain old annoying, and the end-off round could end up a mad dash for ammunition and explosives to take down these relentless lumbering behemoths. At least the campaign briefly let you step into the armor for yourself, and you could become one in multiplayer if you put in the work. That said, because no one likes dealing with juggernauts, the moment you become one, you can expect to be rushed and torn to pieces by the entire enemy team. What is even more annoying is that sometimes these already near impossible to kill enemies will have Riot Shield, which will help them further sponge and deflect damage. Speaking of which,
5.
Literally any enemy with a Riot or Ballistic Shield in any game ever. There's a reason the shield was used on battlefields for thousands of years. There's nothing quite like having a big piece of wood you can stick between you and your opponent. A well-placed shield can cover not only yourself, but also your allies too. The Riot or Ballistic Shields that appear in many shooters today keep the shield alive and prove that it still works damn well in practice. They're great to hide behind when you need to tank enemy fire, but less so when you have to deal with enemies using them. In the aforementioned Call of Duty, the AI likes to use them to get them and their allies up close to you while stopping your bullets from doing any good. The later levels of Uncharted 2 gets quite difficult too, as shield-wielding enemies either calmly advance on you or distract you long enough for a marksman to get you. Yes, this might just sound like bitching about legitimate field tactics, but the fact that most Riot-style shields wouldn't hold up to the amount of punishment in real life that they do in games makes their increasing inclusion in games feel like a cheap excuse for a difficulty curve.
4.
Bothan Spy's Star Wars Battlefront 2. Who here remembers Star Wars Battlefront 2? That game was epic. The campaign somehow even made the prequels seem engaging, and even that wasn't particularly fleshed out. What really made this game was the epic battle you could play against friends or against AI across many different battlefields from the Star Wars universe. Naturally, it was fun to play as the Empire from time to time and try and be one of the stormtroopers who could hit a target. That is, it was fun, right up until Bothan Spy appeared out of nowhere and fried you with its invisible incinerator. The rebel AI in that game always seemed to know when you were on a roll, because that was precisely when one of these elf cat-like things would turn up behind you and end you with a burst of its pocket-sized flamethrower thing. And good luck playing as the rebels. The class was hard to master and had little health. The ability to turn invisible was cool, but it was a real challenge as much as a nuisance with Bothan Spy as the AI was. You know what? After all the trouble these guys caused us in this game, we're glad so many died getting the plans for second Death Star.
3.
Falmer, The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. Skyrim is a fantastic game with lots to do and explore. It also has a wide variety of enemies to deal with, some of them quite annoying. Trolls can be a nuisance early on, and with the Dawn Guard DLC installed, the vampires that turn up in cities to murder everyone border on the game breaking if you don't kill them. After weighing up a number of factors, the title of most annoying enemy in Skyrim has to go to the Falmer. The Snow Elves, or Falmer, do indeed have a rich and fascinating lore, but there are a number of reasons as to why they are so annoying. For one, they ruin spelunking. There are quite a few particularly dark caves or dwarvian ruins that are crawling with these creepy elves, and sometimes they just seem to appear out of nowhere. There's a good chance you've just exhausted all your healing potions fighting off dwarven automatons, going through somewhere like Mzulft. When you're faced with waves of Falmer of varying difficulty who all try and poison you, they have their Insectaurus pets that will jump you and poison you too, which can also be very tough themselves. The hauntingly beautiful underground city of Blackreach is turned into a real slog by the Falmer inhabitants, as is a lot of fighting around the Forgotten Vale in the Dawn Guard DLC.
2.
Route 1 Rodents, Pokemon. You've just picked up your first Pokemon from the professor and set out on your adventure. You take your first few steps out into the wild, and all of a sudden you're ambushed by angry rodents after angry rodents. Sure, each main series game has birds that pop up the first few routes of each game, but most of them turn out to be good Pokemon. The rodents? Well, you have to be pretty ballsy to use Raticate or Rattata later in the game or competitively. Linoon and Barbarelle make good HM slaves and can work with high-risk or rare movesets, and a brave trainer can make Digsby work even if it's technically a rabbit. These early game rodents and their evolved forms are otherwise little more than grinding fodder that pop up just about every patch of grass. Sure, Zubat and Tentacool are pretty annoying in the same way, but they at least evolve into some tough Pokemon. Rattata, Sentret, Zigzagoon, Bidoof, Patrat, and Bunnelby. They're all just very annoying with how often they get in your way. They're not really a challenge, and there is little benefit to beating them. You might think the newest games would have done away with these pests, but instead, Pokemon Sun and Moon gave us two for our trouble. Young Goose, the angry Trump lookalike mongoose, and a Rattata with a fancy black mustache. They could be justified as part of a steady difficulty curve if they only appeared early on in the games, but they just keep attacking you throughout. Then again, they do say you're rarely more than 6 feet away from a rat.
1.
Cazadorus, Fallout New Vegas. The tarantula hawk wasp is one of the nastiest insects in the world. It has one of the most painful stings known to man and hunts tarantulas. Yes, it's nasty enough that it eats goddamn tarantulas for breakfast. Given that it's native to the Mojave Desert, the developers of Fallout New Vegas decided that giant mutant tarantula hawk wasps absolutely needed to be in the game. This, as it turns out, is more annoying in practice than it is terrifying, though the Cazador wasps will still absolutely kill you if you're unprepared. If you ever see a bunch of red lines darting about on your in-game compass, hold back. It's probably a swarm of Cazadors. They move lightning fast and get right up in your face, but their small frames and movement speed makes them a total pain to hit without the aid of a VATS mode. Even with VATS, they can be difficult to hit, and headshots aren't in any way more damaging, as with most enemies. If you're smart, you try and shoot their wings to slow them down, though they'll still come at you pretty fast. Melee weapons are still a viable option, but once you're in that close, there are probably 3 of them in your face, and one of them is almost certainly going to poison you. What's worse about these bugs is that you can run into at the very start of the game and get punished from venturing away from the suggested path, and they're still not much easier to deal with when your character is a higher level. Some quests actively send you into their nests, which are often in tight canyons where they'll trap you for good. Long story short, they're fast and frustratingly difficult. They rarely get any easier to deal with the more you play the game.
Don't forget to like us and subscribe for more Elite Facts.